So we talked a little bit about what community care can look like right now, like the little things that we can do right this very moment to really begin to shift and move ourselves in this direction of self-care as community care. So the next thing, and it's kind of like the vision of like, once we begin to like cultivate this idea of community care, what could that look like in the future? Like, what is that, the greatest vision of that? And so to have a little conversation about that, because we know once we can begin to create it and think it and put it out there, then we can begin to shift our energy around that big idea. So let's have a little bit of conversation about the big idea, because we've got a lot of them.
Yeah. Oh, so many big ideas. So I think we're going to start this one off like huge because in the last segment, we talked a little bit about the idea of rugged individualism kind of standing in the way of community care. Well, if we were able to like magically erase rugged individualism from the whole thing and have everyone across even like the whole globe adopt this like community care mentality where we automatically do things with a recognition of, okay, what's the impact? How does this help people? How does this help other people? Like, I'm not doing something just for me. I'm not like putting my blinders on and hitting the grindstone. I'm like, okay, I'm going to create something that's intentional and purposeful and helping everybody. And so then we create world systems that lift everybody up. So we don't have this like capitalistic, like profits driven mentality in jobs and workplaces. We have, how do we create workplaces, if workplaces even exist anymore at that point? I don't know, right? Like, how do we create daily scenarios, workplace scenarios, whatever, where what any single person is doing is lifting up everybody else, is helping everybody else?
Could you try again?
Yes, thank you, Apple Watch. We can create scenarios where everything that everybody's doing is lifting up everybody else. It's making your life easier. It's making the people's lives around you easier. It's making the lives that, let's say it is business, right? The lives that business is there to serve. That, because that's a different way of looking at that, right? Like, business doesn't exist to make me money because I own the business. Businesses exist to serve the people. And now all of a sudden, all of it is helping everybody. And I know that sounds like to some that probably sounds like, wow, that's such a like far out there woo woo, like, oh, you want to just go help everybody. But I really think that's possible. I really think it is possible to have systems and frameworks in place because our mentalities have shifted so much that everything we do helps everybody. It improves everybody's lives. And I think that's like the ultimate community care for me is I'm not facing barriers because of frameworks that are put in place to help, or frameworks that only help certain people.
Well, I think that it does require a almost like Grand Canyon size shift in our thinking, and how we see the world, how we see our own interaction with the world and people around us. But I do think that we have those sorts of sorts of chasms because of the frameworks that are in place. So yes, because of the frameworks in place, it is hard to operate, whether woo-woo or like logistically in that space all the time. And so it does begin, like, how can we begin to shift those systems and frameworks? I think one is, by electing people who have those visions in mind, not of just the status quo, but like, what could a world be like? Those visionaries, those visionary leaders, those compassionate leaders, those empathetic leaders. I mean, with the Wright brothers, flying a plane, that was woo-woo.
That's crazy. Yeah.
It was possible. And it's interesting, like, once it was possible in that moment, like, it was just this, like, I mean, just imagine all these years not flying. And in the time between, was it 1903 and now, it's very short compared to the whole span of humanity.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and that just shows the nature of things. Like once we begin to kind of crack that code, crack that framework, crack that system, and begin to like, oh, breathe, like, oh, wow, this is possible.
Yeah.
Then it becomes like a rapid, like, crumbling of these old frameworks and then building the new ones on top of it.
Yeah.
So I think that if we can get to that cracking, and I think that we're on the verge of that, because there's so many, so you can feel it. It's palpable. This energy, this uprising, this standing for the truths and the things that we know to be true about our own, like, humanity and human rights, and those sorts of things, standing in that, you know, in the face of some of the things that we're seeing. I mean, we're at the point, we're at that cracking point. And I think that's what's going to make this vision of self-care as community care as a way of life possible. Because I think it has become a way of life, not just something we check off a list. Who have I helped this week?
Right.
It becomes such an innate default that it's just the way we live, right?
Yeah.
And we see examples of that in lots of different cultures where community is really held in such high regard. It's just natural. It's natural to live among one another. It's natural to support one another economically or for resources. It's just a way of life. So this is not some like out there idea. There are lots of cultures that are practicing this.
Yeah.
Like, how can we take that, the example that they set, and then begin to like globalize it, you know, and kind of get out of our the frameworks that we've created that are really not working for anybody.
Yeah. For anybody.
I mean, on any level. I mean, you know, it may work for some folks on some economic level, but like, man, what's the cost of that, right?
Yes.
It's not working at all the levels. It just isn't.
You know, if we start doing certain things now that in the future make that possible, because like I think ultimately that shift happens anyway, just out of the evolution of humanity. I think we ultimately shift into it gets to a point where we need to depend on each other that much. And I think that's kind of like what came out of COVID, if we were really paying attention, was this recognition of just how much we really depend on each other, whether we like to think so or not. So I think eventually we would have to get to that point where everybody, or enough people, like there's a critical mass of people realizing, and then there's a shift. I think we don't have to wait that long until it becomes a need. I think we can do things in the meantime, or set out on pathways that help build that critical mass to the tipping point. You know, if you're in a position in a workplace, I don't know why I always go to these workplace scenarios. If you're in a position in a workplace where you can make decisions or have influence to do things differently, do them in a way that allows people's work to benefit each other and other people, where there's not competition, where there's like a healthy place to show up and be and show up authentically, where we can actually make decisions that benefit the people we're serving, the people that the business is serving, rather than only benefiting the bottom line, you know. And I think there's all kinds of other scenarios of, like, you know, if you're friendly with enough people who live nearby and y'all can share a car, you can share gardening equipment, you can literally plant a garden together. And this conversation really quickly starts to go back to, I think, the ecological consciousness series a bunch of months ago. But it's all the same. At some point, all the conversations we are having start to become one conversation, because they do really all intertwine. But you know, this whole shared resources thing, right? Like, we could have, you know, living co-ops where there's one shared kitchen and everybody cooks together, because it would just save on so much. It would save financially. It would save on time. It would save on the food that needs to get bought and cooked. And I mean, it saves on so much. Maybe it's like apartment buildings in cities. Like, there's one big kitchen at the bottom and everybody takes turns.
Yeah, I mean, the possibilities are limitless, right? Yeah. And then like, it also feeds that connection.
Yeah.
It feeds that I think that desire that's innate within us to connect, to serve, to be of service, to be served, right?
It's also creating moments,
Mm.
right? Like could be small moments if we're all sitting and eating together, kind of like what you're saying. It could be like community game night, but it can be things that are like events that are scheduled that help us realize or reinvigorate that purpose, that meaning that we have. I think it could be events or moments that really re-energize us. Like I've just recently like rediscovered again for, I don't know, probably like the 10th time. Like, oh, right. When I get out in nature, it's this rejuvenating effect.
Yeah.
And everything else feels way less impactful because it's like, oh, right, I can go and just like connect. That's my happy place.
Which becomes self-care. So this like rejuvenation sort of thing is like self-care. And so it's like this cycle. Siri is on it today.
Yeah, she's all about it. Self-care, apparently. Yeah, it is. It does. It becomes this cycle of community care becomes self-care, becomes self-care, becomes community care. Yeah. I am excited to see where all this goes. I think there's so much that's possible for community care in a way that's way greater than what I've known it to be in the past.
So thank you for coming along this wild ride of self-care. And today, self-care is community care. And so I don't know about you, but I hope that you come away with like one thing that you can do today or this week or this month to really begin to practice community care. And it looks different for all of us. We're all in different communities and have different connections. But what is one thing? This is your homework. What is the one thing that you can do to begin to demonstrate community care? And so we know that once we begin to practice this, it becomes a circular benefit of self-care, community care. Self-care is community care. And then it becomes a way of life, kind of a default way of being. And that is the vision of community care. So if you'd like to kind of dive into this conversation a little bit more, join us on Thursday at 7 p.m. for The Gathering. It's our small group event where we can come together and talk a little bit more about this topic of self-care as community care, maybe how it showed up in our own experience and what are ways that we can begin to practice this on a deeper level. If you want to check out anything on SEC, Soul Evolution Collaborative, check us out on our website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. There's so many fun events coming up. Too many to name. So jump on over to soulevolutioncollaborative.org and you can find like all the things that are going on. And so if we don't see you at any of those things or on Thursday, then we will definitely see you back here next week at Truth Be Told 2.0.